The Floating Island of the Sun. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. Maya Angelou. The winters are harsh in the south of Dobruja. So are the summers and falls. Springtime is bearable, but short. The villages are spread along the Danube, which is usually out of sight, either because of the woods or because of the vineyards. When it can be seen in the distance, it looks more like a thin film of water, flowing so slowly that it appears to be standing still. It's a murky and raw blue. Moreover, the Danube can appear to be old water, old even back when the earth was still being formed. In the beginning was the Word. That's hard to believe when you're standing on the banks of the Danube. Rather, it seems that in the beginning was the water. It was to such a village, one connected to the water, that my parents, both country medical doctors, came in 1961, and they stayed in the south of Dobruja for quite some time, nearly 10 years. Upon their arrival, they received for their use from the mayor's office a 2-room house in which they would operate their medical dispensary. The house had a kind of extended porch covered with grapevines. In Dobruja, because of the intense heat, all of the houses had an arbor covered with grapevines, even when the families who live in them don't make wine. The covered arbor usually extends from the front gate to the front of the house, held up by an iron frame. Somewhere off to the side, like a summer kitchen under the leaves, there is usually a small platform on which there is a wooden table covered with a tablecloth. That's where they eat, drink their coffee, play backgammon, chat, and smoke. The house that my parents were given did not have such a place where you could spend time in the summer because it was very small, just 2 rooms, one on the right and one on the left of a single hallway. The one on the left served as their medical office, while the other was their bedroom. The rooms had low ceilings and wooden floors covered with burlap rugs, and they didn't let in much light. But they were still somehow much too roomy for the 2 suitcases of clothes and medical books with which the 2 young graduates were beginning their life together. As a matter of fact, they were incredibly young, because the Stalinist-era high school they had attended only required 10 years of study in those days. If you'd started school at age 6 and university studies at age 16, you would have every chance of becoming a country doctor by the time you were 21 or 22. Mother looked to be 16 when she was 22, and throughout her life she always appeared to be much younger than her age. My father had opted for an assignment to the village of Oltina based on a wine label he'd seen. Upon their arrival there in the fall of '61 in a horse-drawn wagon, which had waited for them at Băneasa to take them to Oltina, the bus route went only as far as Băsena, and even before they'd reached the dispensary where they would be living for a while, their first patient was a small boy in an alcoholic coma who had collapsed just outside the village. It was the first time they'd ever seen such a thing. It was not the last. It was the end of September. The light flowed like strips of pleated paper carried on the wind from the hills of Oltina into the distance towards Ostrov. And in the people's homes, the grapes must be fermenting into wine. The water from the Danube was only for cooking or washing, but not for drinking. And because fountains are rare in Dobruja and must be dug through limestone, the village had a strict policy. In months containing the letter R, September, October, November, December, January, February, March, and April, the people would drink wine, while in the months without an R, they would drink plum brandy. They had this policy because usually by Easter, everyone would have finished off their wine. And besides, what could be better than a cool plum brandy brought up from the cellar when it's the middle of an oppressive heat wave and you come in from the field? This sacrosanct policy of the villages along the Danube is followed by everyone, even the very young. Moreover, in the summer, when they had much work to do around the house and the older children were away at school or gone on errands, and they didn't have anyone to stay with their younger siblings, if their baby was crying, the women of Oltina would take some poppy seeds, wrap them in a handkerchief, and use it as a pacifier. The baby would happily chew on the poppy seeds and fall asleep. In the baby's small head, the village would begin to spread out over the hills like the hide of a tiger stretched out in the sun to dry, a mixture of strange colors and crevasses. The earth plowed up between the rows of grapevines would form a crust and flow down into the Danube, like into a sewer where used things wind up. The used sky, the used earth, all sorts of colors. In their amazing dream, Oltina would float down the valley on the Danube until it reached the river's mouth and arrived at Sulina. Oltina and Sulina, sister cities with their smell of barges, dried and salted fish, and ropes with red onions hung from the eaves in the fall. Then, conquered, resigned, and eternal, the colors from Oltina, together with those from Sulina, would flow into the sea, and peace would be restored. Mother, like any young and extremely scrupulous doctor, tried to put an end to the silken road in the dreams of the infants, through which the colors of Oltina could reach the sea and even other ports in the world, but she didn't have much success. The only result was that the addicted babies from her area became involved in criminal activities and hid themselves among even deeper dreams. At the age of 3, when it was time for them to have their first glass of fermenting grape must, most of them were already immune to vices, and some of them eventually would give in and become dream merchants for others. In any event, Mother took great care of her newborn patients, not only because infant mortality was a factor for which the comrade doctors could be harshly punished by the Romanian Communist Party, but also because that's how she was. She could not allow a plant, an animal, or a person to die. In those days, there were no incubators out in the countryside in the distant villages. So when a woman from the village gave birth to premature twins, Mother and the midwife with whom she worked at the clinic decided to save them at any cost. For this, they improvised a sort of crib between the stove and the wall, wrapped them up, and maintained a constant temperature day and night. At first, they had to feed them with a pipette, and later on with a baby bottle. Mother, who would sleep in the other room of the dispensary, used to get up during the night to listen to them breathing. The woman who had given birth to them had long since departed. She had other children at home and a household to keep, and so she left it up to Mother and the midwife to care for the twins as best they knew how. Maybe she, too, had learned that business about the party and the doctors being forced by the party to keep people alive, and was therefore not worried. After about 2 months, when they were big and lively enough, she'd come to take them home. She entered the room, undressed them, went outside with both of them in her arms, and began to rub them with snow. She did so quickly, with rapid movements, and skillfully, as if she'd done this many times before. Mother, tired out from the 2 months she'd spent next to the small improvised incubator near the stove, wanted to yank the woman by her hair, but the midwife stopped her with an abrupt and authoritative gesture. The woman went into the house, wiped the twins off well with a soft towel, dressed them, and left with them. At the doorway, she thanked Mother for her 2 boys and answered Mother's question about the snow. "Comrade doctor, if they're going to die, let them die now. I don't want to go through the trouble of raising sickly children just to have them die later on." Those twins were born 2 years before I was, and they both are still alive today. Because I never got around to meeting them and I never shared any woman's milk with them, they aren't my milk brothers. But because we did share the air of Mother's sleepless nights during the time she was taking care of them, I think that they would be called my air brothers. In the south of Dobruja, the winters are harsh, and so are the people. When it snows, the snowdrifts can isolate a village for more than a month. During that time, the people eat homemade bread, vegetables that had been preserved in the fall, and fish from the Danube. Here they eat a great deal of fish, grilled fish, smoked fish, fish cakes, cabbages stuffed with fish. Once a year at Christmas, those who have a pig will butcher it. Most of it is roasted in sections and stored in lard in large jars. The jars are lined up in the cellar or on the porch, covered with mats or wrapped in old blankets, along with jars of pickles, and that has to last until Easter. Pork or chicken is rare and eaten sparingly. Chickens are butchered once a week on Sundays, but not all Sundays during the year because some Sundays fall during religious fasts and others are natural fasting days, days on which there are no chickens to butcher. For Christmas, because they are God-fearing peasants, they follow the custom of all Romanian peasants. They bring a section of pork to the 3 village authorities, the doctor, the police chief, and the mayor. They do not give the priest anything special for Christmas because they give to him all year long. And the agricultural engineer, if there is one, doesn't matter because they can manage without him.